Hola, bona tarda, em sentiu bé? Sí? Gràcies per ser aquí. Tothom m'ha fet prometre que acabarem molt puntuals perquè pugueu anar a veure ràpidament el partit d'aquest vespre, o sigui que ningú pateixi. Estarem totes animant el Marroc amb insistència puntualment a les 8 del vespre. Avui tenim la sort de tenir amb nosaltres la Carmen Geha, si ho puc pronunciar bé, que ha estat treballant des d'un punt de vista acadèmic, però també com a activista en el desenvolupament de polítiques d'inclusió i contra les polítiques d'exclusió, molt centrada en el tema de protecció de refugiats, representació de les dones, mobilització col·lectiva i experiència a la regió del Pròxim Orient i Nord d'Àfrica. Ella està treballant amb la beca Maria Zambrano, té una trajectòria acadèmica superinteressant i té un treball de recerca sobre el terreny a Síria, Líban i Líbia, que penso que pot ser superinteressant per totes. La Carmen també ha rebut una beca Fulbright de Harvard i ha treballat a l'Institute of Advanced Studies i a la Brown International Research de l'Institut Brown University. Em demanaven que fes una breu presentació al tema. He tingut moltes ganes de sentir la intervenció de la Carmen perquè hi ha aquesta aproximació des del punt de vista dels drets, i jo crec que això és clau, que quan ens apropem a la qüestió de la immigració, que al final és la qüestió de la gent que es mou pel planeta, ho fem des d'aquest punt de vista dels drets, que sovint és el que s'oblida i el que queda més en segon terme. I jo precisament començaria per constatar això, per constatar que en aquesta Mediterrània nostra les fronteres europees, a còpia d'aquestes polítiques de securitització, de militarització, s'han acabat convertint en espais de no dret, en un espai on els drets, tots els drets, queden congelats en parèntesi, amb situacions de manca de visibilitat i de molta impunitat també, amb un objectiu que no té res a veure amb el control migratori i que de fet això és sabut, aquesta lògica que més es vulnerin els drets i més es maltracti la gent a les fronteres europees, menys gent sortirà dels països d'origen per intentar arribar a Europa. No té cap sentit i fa molts anys que s'està practicant i es veu que no funciona, que els factors que expliquen els moviments migratoris tenen a veure sobretot pels factors d'expulsió en origen, no les expectatives de com és l'acollida en els llocs d'arribada i per tant responen a uns altres interessos polítics que no són el control migratori com a tal. Si dèiem que les fronteres europees s'han convertit en aquests espais on es vulneren els drets més fonamentals, estem parlant del dret a la vida, per començar, però estem parlant també del dret a la protecció dels menors, a la no separació de les famílies, a la no discriminació per raó d'origen, de raça, de religió o de gènere, el dret a una defensa jurídica real i efectiva, per no parlar ja del dret d'asil o la protecció internacional que pràcticament a la realitat de les fronteres s'ha convertit en paper mullat avui. Si tota la gent que es topa amb aquestes fronteres en els seus camins pateix aquesta vulneració de drets, quan anem a veure què passa en el cas de les dones, aquesta vulneració és doble i també això moltes vegades s'oblida. Diguem-ne, si les dones patim vulneració de drets en contextos segurs, com poden ser una discoteca a Barcelona, en aquest tipus de contextos de vulneració de drets general, l'experiència de les dones i de les nenes té factors diferencials que val la pena entendre i que se superposen en aquesta altra vulneració general. Si m'ajuden des de la cabina, només algunes situacions que jo he pogut viure i explicar al diari Ara i que crec que són il·lustratives del que estem parlant. Aquesta noia la vaig conèixer a l'Open Arms, en una noia eritrea, em va explicar el seu periple des d'Eritrea, tot el camí fins a arribar a Líbia, camí atroç i que havia durat 2 anys, i ella explicava com l'havien violat 2 vegades en el camí, però el que a mi més em va impressionar més era que tant ella com totes les seves companyes i la resta de gent que ella coneixia l'experiència migratòria, les seves amigues, les seves familiars, totes s'havien implantat un dispositiu anticonceptiu subcutani perquè sabien que en el camí el més probable és que serien violades i per intentar evitar. Imaginar-te com concep una noia de 18-19 anys el fet que farà aquest camí i que es prepara per fer aquest camí implantant-se un dispositiu anticonceptiu perquè sap molt bé a què s'exposa, doncs il·lustra aquestes situacions de violència sexual que són molt generalitzades, no són experiències puntuals ni molt menys. Si podem passar a la següent, sisplau. També us volia parlar de com els rols de gènere intervenen també en el procés migratori i es capgiren. Alguna vegada m'agradaria també sentir l'experiència de la Carmen sobre això. I és que quan una migra, normalment munta un equip per emigrar, perquè les possibilitats de sobreviure o de patir menys es maximitzen si això es fa en equip i no individualment. I això fa que aquests equips puguin ser diferents de les estructures familiars tradicionals en els països d'origen o de destí. I el primer cas que veieu aquí és Ahmad, és un refugiat sirià que era enginyer petroler de la regió de Deir el-Zor a Síria, que a més era molt interessant perquè explicava coses molt interessants de què havia passat amb el petroli, el Daesh, les connexions amb el règim, explicava coses molt reveladores, però ell havia fet un equip estrany, perquè ell tenia 2 fills, el seu fill gran havia sigut detingut a l'inici de la revolució contra Bashar al-Assad, la seva dona, la mare del noi, per motius familiars, perquè era alauita, tenia una mica més d'opcions de poder trucar a les portes de les presons del règim per mirar de localitzar el fill que portava temps desaparegut. I hi havia un segon fill, que era un nano més petit, que tenia 13 anys i que a més patia una discapacitat de naixement. I llavors la decisió va ser que la mare es va quedar a Síria intentant buscar el fill detingut i el pare, amb el nen discapacitat, va fer aquest viatge sol i jo el vaig trobar a Grècia, ara està a Alemanya, se n'han sortit. I el nano també perquè gràcies a les ajudes que pot rebre allà té una escolarització i l'estan ajudant a tirar endavant. Però aquesta idea de com la vida d'aquesta gent va saltar pels aires un bon dia i es van recol·locar els rols també dins de la família per intentar trobar la forma més racional i amb més possibilitats de sortir-se. I l'última cosa que us volia ensenyar com a exemple, si pots passar a la següent, és aquest reportatge que vam fer a la illa de Samos, és una de les illes gregues més properes a Turquia, on no és tan coneguda com Lesbos, ha tingut menys... Espera un moment, torna a posar la foto, sisplau. On ha tingut menys exposició mediàtica, però hi ha una situació absolutament catastròfica, fins ara en un camp de refugiats que els mateixos refugiats denominen la jungla, per les condicions de birra terrorífiques que hi ha allà. Ara això ho van tancar, els han posat en un centre perdut a dalt de la muntanya, fora de la vista de tothom, i amb unes condicions pràcticament d'empresonament. Però abans que s'obrís aquest nou centre, que és un dels projectes pilots de gestió de nous centres de la Unió Europea, vam anar a la jungla, en aquest campament més informal que hi havia als voltants de la ciutat de la capital de Samos, i sense voler-ho, perquè nosaltres no ens havíem plantejat l'objectiu de fer un reportatge sobre la dona refugiada, anàvem a explicar la realitat, doncs ens vam anar topant, sense pretendre-ho, amb aquests testimonis de dones que eren molt reveladors. Això era una nena que tenia uns poquets dies, que havia nascut feia una setmana, que la mare va parir a l'hospital, com totes les dones parien a l'hospital de Samos, i quan s'havien refet del part, doncs les tornaven al camp de refugiats, en aquesta jungla, amb elles i les criatures. Si us hi fixeu, té uns mitjonets a les mans per no passar fred, i el que ens va explicar la mare, recordo que la nena es deia Dià, que vol dir llum en àrab, i el que ens va explicar la mare és que la primera nit que van passar en el camp de refugiats, a la nena li va mossegar una rata al cap, i això era una experiència quotidiana, no era una situació extrema, era milers de criatures i famílies amb una mena de favela gegant plena de rates, escorçons i tota mena de brutícia, doncs és una experiència quotidiana. Jo em quedaria una mica també amb aquesta idea de que no són només les experiències en origen que fan, que obliguen a la gent a marxar de casa, sinó les situacions traumàtiques a què són exposades durant un període llarguíssim de temps en aquest trajecte fins que acaben d'arribar a Europa, maten i emmalalteixen. I després aquesta gent acaba arribant igualment, perquè és evident que això és imparable, el que passa que havent acumulat, superposat, una sèrie de traumes que objectivament els hi fan molt més difícil tornar a començar amb les seves vides a casa nostra. So Carmen, I'm very pleased to have you here today. Looking forward to hearing from you. Maybe you could start to tell us a little bit in your view what makes women and girl refugee experience different or particular than the male mates, and why is this gender approach necessary?
Okay, thank you so much. It's difficult to go after you, Christina, and after the stories. I read the Samos story very closely, and I know that you didn't intend to go with the idea of examining gender, but that you come across this suffering. I want to thank Caja Forum and EMED and the Club of Rome for having me. It's a very emotional day for me. I'm a migrant. I've been here 8 months. And it's the first time that I really get to speak on this issue from this side of the world. I have done research in Lebanon and Syria and Libya, but to be on the other side of the Mediterranean, so thank you very much.
We need these voices from this side, definitely.
And just to begin to answer you, it's because of the activist spirit in Barcelona. First of all, I feel super welcomed, and it's also because Barcelona has a lot of experience in developing inclusive policies, and it's because of this spirit, I think, that I want to talk today about women and in migration and refugees who are survivors. The question is not how to protect women, but how to help women benefit from their experience so that they can help others, and how we can develop strategies for the Southern Mediterranean coming from Spain and coming from Europe that are more inclusive of women's voices. Of course, conflict exacerbates gender-based violence. I think the estimates are that the Mediterranean basin is the deadliest migration zone in the world. An estimated 33,000 people plus die every year trying to cross the Mediterranean. A large portion of that are women. When I landed in Barcelona in April, I really shed a lot of tears because I figured that I was very lucky. I'm categorized as a high-skilled migrant. Of course, I'm extremely privileged, even with all of Lebanon's problems, but not everybody is as lucky. And if you arrive to this side of the Mediterranean on a dinghy, on a boat, if you've been raped along the way, and if you've been categorized a refugee or an asylum seeker, then your skills of survival are not recognized. Integration of women, refugees, and integration of young girls is not only about setting up tents to give them sanitary pads when they arrive, and that's very important, very much needed, but it's also about integrating their losses into a policy that has to do with their survival. And also not negating the looming threat today of return that a lot of migrant and refugee women face. I'm not sure there is much to say. If you've already watched The Swimmers, I don't have much to add. I suggest that you watch it. The film is based on really a very true story. It's an accurate depiction of what happens to two young women who were champions in their country and became refugees overnight. And that category, as we watch the movie and see the way that they're groped, they lose their family, we also realize that they lose their professional identity, who they are. And those two girls end up saving a boat. So imagine if you're a policymaker trying to develop a strategy, looping people together, women included, young women, old women, as a monolithic entity, makes you as a policymaker, as a receiving city, lose the potential skill and talent that women have, even those that are survivors of persecution. I think it would be very sad for the young woman from Eritrea not to be included because she knows what it's been like. And I think that we can do more on this side. You know, the fight for women's rights and gender equality is not born when women leave. The countries that we come from are some of the worst countries to be a woman, both economically, the lowest women's economic participation in the world, the lowest political participation of women in the world. But there are also cities where there has been a lot of activism around women's rights. That fight doesn't end with migration, and you just have to look outside the window every Saturday to see Iranian women here in Barcelona protest for their rights. We need to look at migration as much more dynamic, and we need to not only celebrate people like Yusra, who became an Olympian gold medal from Syria, but also the many women that die and don't make it. A lot of the narrative in Europe and in the region is about empowering women and celebrating the lucky ones, the PhDs, the activists. But most people are not so lucky, and the journey should not be so difficult. They should not have to risk death to be able to seek a better life. And once they arrive, they should not only, as women, be treated as a monolithic entity. Young women have different needs. Elderly women have different needs. So I'm going to talk briefly about a mass exodus today of women activists. You asked me to prepare some stories. You can interrupt me whenever you like. I've put the quotes from departure to integration to fighting against return, and just to share a flavor of this. There's a mass exodus of women leaving, not only because they are impoverished, there's a mass exodus of women leaving because of persecution, because of oppression, because of a lack of hope. And these women want to do something. And it's not uncommon, particularly in a city like Barcelona, to have different diaspora communities engaged in change back home. Those are allies, both of European policymakers and of their sisters back home. In departure, so I do a lot of research on Lebanon and Syria. There is an expert here, Razan from Syria. I will not tell you that there are 3.7 million refugees coming from Syria and that we need to understand their different needs. I'm going to share a little bit some quotes about the research that I'm doing. It's not unusual that human rights organizations, for example, in Lebanon, estimate 1 death of migrant worker women per week. It's also not uncommon it's not unimaginable to think that among the 100 or so people that died trying to leave Tripoli in Lebanon on a boat, many of them were women and were migrant women. Activists working on women's rights in the region, they depart in a state of despair. One woman, she told me, I almost died getting out. I was put in a trunk for 2 days straight, a journey that would have taken 2 to 3 hours via the Lebanon border. And she said, but that was the easy part. I left Syria because it was no longer safe for me to go on the balcony. So departure carries its own weight and carries its own trauma. We cannot, when somebody arrives to Lebanon or to Barcelona or to Berlin, put them in a box and tell them we need to understand what it took. Another human rights activist lawyer, she told me, I did not really leave Libya. I still do work and activism, but I am not there physically. I would have stayed, believe me, she says. But the death threats did not scare me personally. I am a mother of 2 children, and I've seen what happens to orphans in my town. Many Libyan women, female parliamentarians, journalists, bloggers got assassinated in the last 10 years in Libya. And this is something we don't see. We see pictures of lots of women in tents, women sad, crying, but also we don't see the struggle that women did on the other side of the Mediterranean to continue fighting. So she said she was not scared of death threats, and it's a reasonable thing to say because many women were assassinated in Libya. But she said, I've seen what happens to orphans, so I left physically for them. We went via Malta, and from there to the Netherlands. I'm here now, but my body is here now, but my heart is there. Speaking on arrival, like I said, women in the MENA region already have the lowest economic participation rates in the world. For example, in my country, Lebanon, the recently published Security Index estimates that to reach gender parity in parliament in Lebanon, it's going to take 404 years. So these are dismal conditions of representation. Women are leaving already excluded from decision-making, but also very angry and with a long experience in organizing. And they can still organize as migrants if they are included in forums like here today, in order to think about how policies can be more responsive to their needs. The dangers of mobility for women in Libya. In Yemen, women cannot move without a mahram, for example. So jobs and mobility, these already back home is quite oppressive. So this is what someone told me on their arrival. She said, I was an activist back home. She's Lebanese. She had a lot of hope. But right now, I've lost my network of support. I'm starting from scratch. I barely have enough time to catch up because now I'm supporting my parents who lost all of their money. All in all, I'm not sure if my career will recover from this blow. I'm sharing this quote because this is an example of somebody who arrived to Europe. She's safe. She's working. But we often don't think that migrants and refugees living in conditions of persecution are losing their professional network, their identity. We often think of migration, the end of it is people arrive, they rent a home, and that's it. But they're losing a professional network and a professional identity, like swimming, could be of added value to help and save others. But it's very hard for women to do that, having left already countries where they were not treated as equals. Somebody else on arrival and integration, she said, Berlin gave me freedom to enjoy my life, my sexuality. It's something that would have gotten me killed back home. I want to support others, but I feel marginalized and with little voice, as if I'm only here to survive, just to get by, okay? And there's a lot of quotes on this on arrival. So just to shed the light that arriving at somewhere physically safe is not the end of it. And I'm going to speak a little bit on return, and then we can open it up. There is a looming threat today of forced returns from Denmark all the way to Lebanon. And we need to counter this by recognizing that people may not be able or willing to return. Someone was telling me she's young, she works in Turkey, she's a student. She's been there 10 years, Syrian. And she said, it's been 10 years. Every time they ask me why I'm here, can't I just tell them I like Istanbul? I'm here because I like it. I like the food. I have a job. It's like this constant, why are you here? How long have you been here for? When are you going back? And there is a cultural aspect to this, but there is also a physical danger because Syrians leaving now to go back there's a lot of documentation on disappearance and torture. So we need to think about a gendered policy on return, and what is it that women, refugees, and migrants who've survived all of this, what can they do to imagine different futures than just return? Because migration has this temporal aspect. When are you going to go back? Many people are not willing or able to go back. And someone tells me from Syria, I dream about it every day, and I wish I could stop dreaming about it. It will never be home again. As an artist, Syria is a black box. The ones who go in may never go out, and for people like me, it could mean suicide. So what should we do with this artist? Put them in a boat or a train or buy them a ticket and send them back because they come in a box that happens to make them refugees? Somebody else tells me, my kids are Dutch. Our family lives in a very Dutch neighborhood. I am involved in human rights protection back home. Return is out of the question. What I will do next, I don't know, but I will not return. And so on and so forth. So I want to talk about, just to close, the ways in which migrant women and refugees who have survived can challenge the status quo, even in countries of migration. I want to express my thanks to Barcelona as a place with a lot of history of activism. I'm on a fellowship carrying the name Maria Zambrano, who herself was in exile for a very long time. And I want to open up debate at the end of 2022 about what can be done with women and refugees who survive all of this trauma, but who feel either marginalized because they have arrived, yasta, or feel always scared to return home, or with a little bit of support and solidarity can actually end up saving lives in different ways. From a policy angle, just briefly, I'll close with this. Khafier is here, Iamed, everybody is here. We have dismal data and we have dismal gender disaggregated data. Maybe we can work on this better. And I don't only mean percentages, more stories. Let's ask women and refugees more than how old are you and do you have kids, but more, what are your talents? What do you hope to achieve? What political work did you do back home that could help with issues here? So data and stories. We need more inclusion in policy making, I think, in general, but also in programs and strategies. The EU spends a lot of money trying to empower women without changing structures, and I used to fight a lot against this. We can empower women a lot, but if they are sent out to a street and can be killed, if they are living in a regime that survives on impunity and war crimes, if rape is not criminalized, if gender-based violence is not supported through courts, this empowerment is not enough. So we need to rethink a little bit around this. And I cannot stress it more that the looming threat of return, I think we need to be creative as communities from the region across the Mediterranean about different possibilities of the future that are not just about putting people on a boat or a bus and sending them back. And I think women are allies because they are survivors of all of this. And together we can think of making these policies more inclusive.
Thank you very much, Carmen. Ara tinc unes quantes preguntes per la Carmen i d'aquí un quart d'hora us passarem la paraula per si vosaltres també teniu ganes de preguntar-li coses. Estic segura que sí, però acabarem a l'hora pel partit, no patiu. One thing I was thinking about while listening to you now is this idea that the border is not anymore a line in a map. I mean, the borders is something that will follow you all your entire life, maybe your life and your children's lives, and that you never finish to cross it. I mean, the border is always there, no? It's like a heavy backpack you carry with it. No? So this idea of the border as a kind of, dispositive with many, made of many things that defines your life, or they pretend, to define your life long afterwards you've crossed it physically, no?
In major ways. And like you said, borders are not geographic. So if we take today, because I've worked a lot with refugee students here and abroad, a student from Afghanistan or from Iran or from Yemen has a burden of a border that occupies their mind, their safety, their well-being. Although that student can be just as talented or amazingly gifted as just the other girl sitting next to them, but that young woman is carrying borders of patriarchy and violence, and she's in a box of, she's a student visa, maybe she's married, maybe she's a lesbian, we don't know. And these borders occupy her mind more than someone else and limit her potential. It's very difficult to overcome borders that are not only geographic. Many friends, we Lebanese have a long history in migration. I have friends who are second-generation Canadian and still carry the burden and the border of identity politics that locks them. And the sad part is that it eats away from their talent. It eats away from their potential. It eats away from their self-confidence. Many migrants and refugees that make it, especially on persecution and asylum, commit suicide. It's not a geographical border that you cross and Yasta, you are here. We need to think more creatively, I think, and in a more inclusive way. And I really do believe that Barcelona is a good place to do this. I feel very welcomed here and very humbled because Barcelona houses people from many persecuted countries, not just Lebanon and Libya and Syria.
I think we tend to see refugees in general and women in particular mainly as victims. And I feel this is not only inaccurate, but also denies their agency. I mean, I will try to picture them more as survivors, so a lot of things to learn from them, no?
I think so as well. My grandma was a Palestinian refugee. If I told her she was a victim, she would probably hit me. So, no, I think victimization and sensitization, depiction and representation, I think we need to work better, and I think you do this in your media work and investigative work to help refugees and migrant women self-represent in a more creative way, in a more inclusive way, in a more diverse way. And I think, yes, there is a victimization, and victimization only goes so far. Like, it's very hard to keep saying, the EU should do a better job, the UN should do a better job. This victimization creates a narrative of someone powerful and someone who is not powerful, and it's not fair to both sides because it's not the UN's responsibility, and it's also not the refugees' responsibility, but if they think together, they can overcome victimization. And today the world is ample evidence of projects of co-creation and projects of thinking more inclusively. But yes, pictures of, when we say refugee women she's carrying, 3 kids. No, it's not just that. And I think that there are now more examples with social media of self-representation of refugees and migrants. What do they want to look like? What do they wear? What are their dreams? How can they help the cities that they believe that they arrived at? What did they survive? And how relevant is that survival to other countries? Because the countries I work on are extreme context countries, yes? They are countries that are characterized by oppression and violence and corruption. But they are not unique. Oppression is not an Arab experience. Violence is not a Lebanese experience. Corruption is not a Lebanese experience. Yes, it is in these places very extreme, but this conversation that we can have together on patriarchy and violence and representation is a much more productive conversation than me sitting asking whoever, please help us, and you're not doing a good enough job, and we are victims. I think that there are enough voices on this side of the Mediterranean to create a better policy.
I'm impressed about your grandmother.
Yeah.
I used to tell my own children that whenever there is a war in Catalonia and they become refugees and they need to fly away, find a place next to the Palestinians,
Yes.
then you will be safe there.
She raised 7 children in a war, and they were not victims, I assure you.
Sure. Let's speak about, I'm curious about how you see the media coverage, so feel free to criticize, please.
No, I think it's nuanced. I think it's important to paint a picture. I think there is excellent content out there. And just last month, there is a movie on the Palestinian experience, Farha, on Netflix, and the week prior, The Swimmers.
What happened with Netflix? Because I can't find it anymore. Have you tried?
Yes, I watched it.
There's something wrong in Catalonia, but it's not working. But I will try to figure it out.
Okay, you're all welcome to come stream it at my house. But I think it's changing. I think there's a lot of content out there. I'm not an expert in media, but I think, for example, your work and the work of many others is shedding light on nuance. And I think that there is a shift, particularly in places like Berlin and others, of self-representation of refugees, telling other stories, that refugees and migrant survivors can also be psychologists and dancers and singers and business people. And I think this is changing, but I think we can tell that story in that refugees and migrants are not monolithic entities. They are not a box. You said in a discotheque, today we can go to a discotheque together, and out of 100 people, maybe there are 2 men that are violent. But not all the discotheque is violent. And it's the same, I think, with any community of people. And I think media is beginning to change. I think it's very nuanced. I don't watch like Fox News and this kind of thing. So I think the narrative here in the papers that I've seen is quite nuanced. And look, I just arrived and I've been given a platform. So I think that there's a lot of good content out there.
Yeah, I sometimes had the experience that while doing this report, you are just giving value to their own experience. I mean, when they feel, recognized by a journalist, I guess it's the same by a researcher, no? That, no, I'm here because I'm interested in what you have to say and what you have to do. And the first answer is, but I did nothing important. No, it's not true. You did something very important and you managed to undergo a very hard situation. So it's true that this exposition sometimes, or the fact that there is a genuine interest, no, to tell their stories or to ask about, and sometimes asking the right questions also can heal a little bit. I don't know.
I agree. Look, any conversation on gender and violence and work is a conversation on invisible labor, right? It's about bringing things that are not considered important, not considered, this is not what is important, right? And bringing it to the forefront and saying that mothering or caring or protesting or organizing a petition, or there is not a single migrant refugee who is doing okay, who arrived, that doesn't send money back home. In Lebanon, there is food inflation. World Food Program says 520% food. There is a discussion on gas inflation in Europe. Food, 500%. I don't know a single migrant refugee community, the new ones, the recent, not the one that is not sending money home for Christmas, for Ramadan. And that is impressive for me. Wow, you have the headspace to give back money when your purchasing power goes down. That is invisible labor. You have the headspace to organize protests, to help. And I think telling a story goes a very long way. And academia, I think it's not as, I think academia is more pretentious sometimes than media. I feel like, no, media sometimes is more real. In academia, we do a lot of research, and we go survey people's needs, a lot of questionnaires, and I think that it's important to give back that data to people who need it, and it's important to work with migrants and refugees on what to ask, what is invisible, what is not being seen when we just take down someone's age, gender, nationality, and job maybe, or right? And I think that recognizing is very important. It builds a lot of confidence, a lot of confidence.
True. I would like to question you also on your fieldwork in Libya, which is a kind of black hole for us, at least for the biggest part of journalists. It's a no-go place, no? So what can you tell us about the condition of refugees in Libya, and particularly on women and girl refugees?
It's very bad, but it's not a black box, because if you let me just be provocative, I think when we I mean, it is a black box, but I think sometimes with these extreme contexts, when we depict them as very, very complicated, we do them a disservice. It means Libya today, yes, is a black box, but what is Libya today? Libya is a bunch of militias that are men, that are armed, a lot of insecurity. There's political impunity, like Lebanon, massive assassinations. Nobody is held accountable, and this exacerbates the situations on migrants on that side and migrants on this side. Libya had, like Lebanon, I think, a big episode of hope, and women were at the forefront. This is something also the media is very sensational. Look, Libyan women, look, Iranian women, of course, because women suffer the most in these countries. So women are always at the forefront of revolution, of protest, of solidarity. I think that you know better on this side of the Mediterranean. I think Libya and Libyan civil society, the same argument that I'm trying to make for Syria, for Lebanon, can be a huge partner to Spain and to Europe, because there's a lot of experience in navigating trouble. And there's a long history of invisibility. So 42 years of Gaddafi, really invisible. We knew nothing about Libya. Journalists couldn't go there, reporters couldn't go there. And so I think, I don't want to speak on people's behalf, but there is a thirst to tell a story and another kind of story. And much of the major women voices today, I follow a lot, Zahra Langi, are actually women that are in exile. And there's a story that needs to be told, instead of saying, and I'm trying to, don't need to provoke you, oh, it's a black box, I'm not going to touch it. No, it's a conflict country with a lack of justice. Every time you have a context of a lack of justice, conflict continues, and I think we can identify people who can explain it to us.
Very good. From your experience advising international aid organization and civil society organization, what is your assessment on how gender issues are being approached?
I'm going to speak about Lebanon on this issue. There is a tendency to reduce the problem to disempowerment of women and focus on women's empowerment. Of course, I'm going to give a provocative example. I know it's not so black or white, but bringing women into a room and teaching them to cook, or bringing women to a room and teaching them about, you have to go advocate for your rights. In my experience, I think that it is more productive to change policies and to work with decision makers. For example, our experience in women's economic participation in the region, I tell this to all of the agencies. I say it's more productive and efficient to work with employers on recruitment strategies for women, retention strategies for women, combating violence at the workplace, maybe investing in safe travel, mobility, like an employer renting a bus so women can come and go to work safely. This is much more productive and efficient and inclusive than only empowering women and clapping for the Nobel Prize or the women who make it on the top. There's two, I think, wrong approaches. Investing in women's entrepreneurship is good. I have many friends who are women entrepreneurs, but it pushes women outside the formal labor. So, for example, in Lebanon, you have migrant domestic workers that are not protected under labor law. So it's better to change the law and give them rights than to tell them, go and open a shop. And so women, too much focus on entrepreneurship, too much focus on empowerment, as if we are stupid, we don't have the skills. No, we have the skills, but the rules of the game are not fair. Lebanon, it was legal for a rapist to marry his victim until 2018. By the way, cohabitation is illegal. You're not allowed to live with a man. So it's not about empowerment. It's not about that women don't know. It's that. So I think it might be interesting for development agencies to think about working on inclusive rules, legislation, safety, security, and this will automatically lift a population of women that I think can go along to change politics in these countries, because it's not always going to be like this in Lebanon, Syria, and Libya. It might be a long time. It's not always going to be like this. And you'll believe me that the women will be the first reformers and the first to gain from changing the system.
The problem is not everybody is interested in the change, no? Let me ask you a last question before I give the floor to the audience. How did the war in Ukraine change the picture? I mean, how the fact that Ukrainian refugees have been very welcome to Europe without all the, bureaucratic and legal issues that the rest of the refugees in the world are facing. I mean, I ask myself this question quite often, is it a positive step? So, guys, this can be done, this is possible, you have proof that this is possible, so let's try to do the same thing for everybody? Or it's more the double standard that, it's hurting a lot also image, in the Arab countries, and the fact that we are not treating the people in the same way because of the place they come from and the color of their skin.
It's a hard question. But I'll tell you what I've picked up, and I'm new to this, because and also the Ukraine crisis is new, so my narrative can change. I think from a policy perspective, it's good that there is now a precedent. We need to document this precedent, what was good about it, what wasn't good. But also the Ukrainian refugee crisis is extremely gendered, as I understood. So in many ways, a lot of women that are arriving to cities like Barcelona from Ukraine that had historically a lot of women from my region created a constructive dialogue, I think, if not together as women, but in spaces like this. The third difficult thing about this is that it made extreme context closer to Europe instead of us addressing extreme context of war and Russian invasion in Syria. Now it's happening right there. So I pick up more on the solidarity of it and more on, like you said, now that this is doable logistically, because again, Ukrainian women and children, even if they arrived and they're staying at a hotel, doesn't mean that their journey ended. And it doesn't mean if they were granted the right to work that they did not also lose their friends and professional network and maybe their husbands. So I think I look at it from a misery perspective as more of a shared misery and something that we can learn from. That's where I'm at right now. I don't know. Some days I'm more angry, but...
Okay, thank you very much. So the floor is yours. Don't hesitate. Welcome. Thank you very much. We need the microphone here, please, on the first rows. Sisplau. So you go first. I will take 3-4 questions and then you come and answer.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you.
I'm Razan. I'm founder of Associación Qudwa based here in Barcelona. I love all the points that you made. Obviously, I'm Syrian originally, and I relate to everything that you said. But actually, something that you mentioned, and I think it applies a lot here in this context, is the focus on empowerment and focus on entrepreneurship. It happens with migrants in here, not only in there. There was a massive focus on migrant entrepreneurship, but that also kind of puts the burden on them to learn all of that and create their own. So it's not about employing them. No, they can create their own work. That's fine. So that it does happen here, and also
restaurants, a lot of restaurants.
So I wanted to also to mention that particularly for women and highly skilled, the people who come as students, they only have either translation or restaurants as work options. So that was, I wanted to know what you thought about it. I loved what you said about focusing on employers. There's no, it doesn't feel like there's a collaboration between CSOs or like civil society organizations or big NGOs that work in migration. Actually, even big NGOs that work in migration rarely hire the migrants that they serve. That's even in UNHCR, they had to do a pledge and say, oh right, yes, there's a skill pool that we might consider. But even as volunteers, they rarely actually consider migrants or refugees. That's why migrant-led initiatives is very important. That was my second question to you, is how important it is to have migrant-led or women-led CSOs and associations and organizations. And I also have to say that 3 years here, it's not easy. There are so many structural barriers to actually create your own movement to be taken seriously. I've been here for 3 years. I'm not taken seriously yet in the space. So I would love to hear.
I'm here for 44 and me neither, so if that helps.
It's a woman thing.
It doesn't. We should all be taken seriously. So I guess I wanted to ask your opinion, your approach about like migrant women-led also initiatives and how they can change the narrative, I guess, particularly in policy debates.
Mm-hmm. We are here for the first line. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Ay, perdoneu, ¿algú més?
Okay. Thank you, Carmen. Voy a hablar en castellano porque he visto que hacen la traducción de inglés al castellano y mi inglés es muy malo. El IME, nosotros hemos trabajado y trabajamos normalmente en los países del sur del Mediterráneo con mujeres, sobre todo evidentemente el área de género y sociedad civil, y realmente las mujeres son las que han llevado a cabo los avances, muchos avances que se dan en las leyes. Lo que pasa, ahora ha habido la conferencia ministerial y los políticos toman unos compromisos que después en las leyes, digamos, se cambian, pero que no se aplican. No se aplican porque hay reservas, no se aplican porque no ponen recursos para que haya comunicación. Esto hablamos de los países del sur. Pero en los países del sur hay mucho talento. Y el problema es que aquí, o sea, en Europa, no se explica, tampoco hay una información y un conocimiento de que hay mucho talento y esto se puede ver, pues yo qué sé, en mujeres cineastas, en músicas, en emprendedores y esto es un problema. Esto es un problema porque la compañera ha hablado que no se la toma en serio. Muchas veces el problema es que se piensa en el país más que en las personas. Y las personas pueden ser altamente calificadas. Yo, que ya tengo una edad determinada, yo estuve en Francia, yo estudié en Francia. Y me decían, yo hablaba y decían, eres española, pues no lo pareces. Yo digo, no lo parece, ¿por qué? Qué cosa extraña, porque te califican por tu régimen y por el gobierno en vez de calificarte personalmente. Por eso yo creo que también se tendrían que tener información, o sea, nosotros tendríamos que tener información de los países del sur y de que hay mucho más talento y que la sociedad civil está mucho más avanzada. Hay gente que no cree en las primaveras árabes. Y yo sí que creo, porque tampoco se creía cuando hubo el mayo del 68, no se cambiaron los gobiernos. El gobierno continuó igual, pero cambió la mentalidad de la gente. Y yo creo que en el sur se ha cambiado la mentalidad y que hay mucho, a pesar del patriarcado, hay mucho más, la gente ha avanzado. Y me gustaría que tú, corroborases o no lo que yo estoy diciendo. Gracias.
Una última pregunta aquí a la quarta fila i després respon i farem una segona ronda, d'acord?
Gracias. Voy a hablar en castellano. También un poco reaccionando a lo que la amiga Siria decía. Yo soy inmigrante, llevo 23 años aquí, vengo trabajando con mujeres migrantes, víctimas de trata, exiliadas, refugiadas de diferentes sitios. y una de las grandes trampas que tenemos es el empoderamiento. Entre más nos empoderamos, más visible es el techo de cristal que tenemos, ¿no? Y un poco la reflexión y la pregunta para ti es, si tú también percibes el hecho de que en las políticas públicas de atención a refugiados, inmigrantes y específicamente en atención a mujeres, hay todo un marketing de que estas políticas sean muy preciosas, sean muy bonitas, pero que en la práctica son ineficientes. No sé
Sorry, perdoneu.
Bueno, quería preguntarte si tú tienes esta percepción. Nosotros dentro de la organización que se llama Mujer Diáspora, que trabajamos con mujeres de diferentes sitios, tenemos la sensación que en el proceso de emigrar, y sobre todo cuando vienes de países de conflicto, hay una pérdida de derechos, que es muy difícil que los migrantes, en este caso las mujeres, seamos capaces de verlo en el momento. Y que, por lo tanto, tratar de que una política como la catalana, en este caso, o la española, aquí yo admiro mucho, quiero mucho, pero son políticas que están pensadas muy bien intencionadas, pero que al no poderse llevar a la práctica satisfactoriamente a quienes, en este caso, piden refugio, como es lo que está sucediendo ahora, se convierte en un hecho más victimizante, ¿no? Entonces, ¿cómo hacer un poco para que estas políticas públicas puedan también ayudar a sanar a los refugiados, ¿no? O sea, esto que es tan grave, que una persona que viene herida, pidiendo que le salven la vida y la acogen durante 2 meses, le dan refugio durante 2 meses y después la dejan en la calle para que se resuelva la vida, eso es inhumano, eso es también un acto de violencia hacia estas personas y está sucediendo aquí, ¿no? Entonces es cómo hacer, y si desde vuestro grupo de investigación también lo trabajáis, cómo hacer o cómo estáis haciendo también para influir en estas políticas públicas, ¿no?
Very, very interesting question, so good luck.
Would you like to comment first?
No, go ahead,
Are
please.
you sure?
Yes. I mean, I all agree with all with what they said.
First of all, sorry, perdóname por mi castellano in Catalan. I hope next year it will be better. You know, when you migrate as a woman, not just with learning languages, you go into a very childlike condition. So when I'm taking classes, I'm remembering as a child, you know, how I studied the alphabet. And it's the same with politics and career. And I think migrant-led organizations and migrant women, and there are many of them in Barcelona. I believe the Director General on Migration in Catalonia is of Mexican origin. So what I'm saying is it's very important today for migrant women here to tell other young migrants, young in mind, I'm old and big, but I'm young. If someone can tell me, look, you can do this. Somebody else did it from Colombia, from Algeria, from Sri Lanka, from France. Look, somebody else can do it. And your job is not only to pay the rent. You can one day be an advocate, be a spokesperson. It goes a long way. And this is, of course, the politics of representation. And so I don't have an answer that you have to do it, Brazan, and you have to do it better, you have to be louder. Because migrants of any age are like children, and they will behave like society tells them that they can behave. When you are Spanish in France, are you supposed to dance flamenco? I mean, you know, like this stereotyping, if you are Spanish or Arab, whatever it is, what are you supposed to do? You know, so I think it's very important to change that and to think of migrants and refugees. Like me, I'm a kid, so if you tell me now you can do this, it's like learning a new language. I think it's very important. Your question on EMED and women's, I'll come back to economic, and women's representation, you're very true. By the way, this is only a conversation that one can have in Barcelona, because I think EMED and people working in Barcelona have a very intimate relationship with women reformers in the southern Mediterranean. You're absolutely right. Women will work on legislation, work on policy, and then when it goes to the ministerial, you see how, I'm going to say it, how stupid our ministers are, how stupid the representation is. And this is a problem. And I think this is where we can push back and say that states that are not democratic do not have monopoly over gender equality. That's it. If a state is not accountable, it cannot be the monopoly. It's not that we have to override the state. We want national women machineries, we want ministers, we want presidents, but we also have to keep in mind, because we live in Barcelona, that they do not have the monopoly over this narrative. So much of this has happened in my lifetime. Colleagues worked on sexual harassment law for 5 years, and in the end it got butchered. This is very common. So I don't have an answer, but do what you're doing, and that brings civil society and activists and survivors and migrants together with the ministers. We cannot expect today a Libyan delegation to have a monopoly over women, peace and security when women cannot leave the house in Libya, and then we go make a deal and we expect that ministerial commission or whatever to enact laws that are inclusive. So we must keep in mind, I think you do this very well, they do not have a monopoly over this discussion. When they become democratic and there's justice and there are courts, then we can sit at home as activists and they will have monopoly. But right now they don't have monopoly. You know better about women's economic participation here. I don't know anything, I'm new. But what worked in the region for a long time, labor rights in the Arab MENA were not equal. We got bored of waiting to work with the states, so we set up a research center, and the center worked with employers, with HR managers, to counter discrimination that occurs at all levels of employment, and it worked to some extent, not all employers. So maybe here also it can work in working with decision makers as migrant-led, women-led, and work with female applicants that arrive here and tell them, you can do it. And then tell the employer not to shout at her if she says something wrong, if her preterito perfecto is not perfect, to create this partnership, because there are 3 arguments for women's economic participation. There is a business argument. Women are talented and they contribute to GDP. There is a moral argument, it's the right thing to do, and there's a sustainability argument. So everybody benefits from hiring the right person in the right job, and particularly women, but it's a work in progress. Otherwise, people get stereotyped. Oh, you are Mexican, Spanish, Lebanese, Syrian, you are supposed to do a certain thing. But I think it works a long way, and I think that many employers would be open to this. And I think maybe a media story about matching and could go a long way in lifting up the narrative. So, yeah.
No sé si puede ser útil. Yo creo que hay un problema, lo percibo desde el activismo y desde tratar de buscar las voces aquí, de aislar a la mujer inmigrante en organizaciones fuera, ¿no? Yo creo que son necesarias organizaciones especializadas en problemas específicos, como, yo qué sé, el tratamiento, ¿no? de las consecuencias de la tortura, o sea, hay un montón de problemas específicos que necesitan una atención especializada, pero creo que el efecto de organizar en general a los inmigrantes o a las mujeres en otro cajón no acaba de funcionar, ¿no? Y pienso que ha habido experiencias también en sentidos distintos, que son interesantes de tener en cuenta. Yo me acuerdo por ejemplo, cuando se aprobó aquí la ley de extranjería al principio, que no es una ley eterna, porque en los años 80 no teníamos ley de extranjería en España y no se había hundido el país ni nada, ¿no? Mucha gente de Marruecos venía, trabajaba la de temporada, volvía, había una movilidad natural. Cuando se impuso la ley y después toda la legislación que criminalizaba el hecho que gente sin papeles formara parte de los sindicatos, ¿no? Hubo una pelea aquí, y yo recuerdo estar discutiendo con dirigentes sindicales y decirles, pero a ver, cuando hubo los encierros, cuando hubo las acampadas en Plaza Cataluña, decirles, pero tú primero los ves negros o trabajadores, ¿qué son, ¿no? Para ti en tu cabeza, ¿no? Y se hizo también un aprendizaje que llevó su camino, ¿no? También ahora los sindicatos están como están, o sea que no, pero esta idea de no ganarse un espacio en la sociedad, no de acogida, sino de aterrizaje, ¿no? Porque aquí acogida no hay. Yo creo que esta idea es importante. Y creo que esto también cambia mucho generacionalmente, o sea, la gente joven, ¿no? Es muy distinto cuando el proceso migratorio te coge en un momento distinto de tu vida, ¿no? Y la gente joven, ¿no? Es otro plan, ¿no? El que se han hecho en su cabeza, otra perspectiva, otra, ¿no? Y, por ejemplo, ahora pasaba con las ucranianas, ¿no? Yo recuerdo estar hablando con maestras y profesores de adultos que tenían en una clase 8 refugiadas ucranianas con sus 10 niños, ¿no? Y me decían, es que es muy difícil porque esta gente no se ha hecho el plan de venir a vivir aquí, están, ¿no? pendientes en cualquier momento que la guerra va a terminar y podrán... volver a su casa, ¿no? Entonces, ¿de qué sirve, ¿no? Todo esto? Recuerdo a las profesoras diciéndome, hago catalán de supervivencia, o sea, ¿cómo voy al médico? ¿Cómo voy al...? ¿no? Bueno, entonces, yo creo que este eje en las jóvenes, ¿no? Para mí, yo que sé, ahora lo ves muy claro con las iraníes, es que el otro día estaba en una manifestación en Plaza Sant Jaume de las chicas iraníes y había un cartel que llevaba una chica que decía no vengas con tu islamofobia ¿no? a meterte entre nosotras. O sea, aquella chica había ido, ¿no? A Irán, digo en su cabeza, ¿no? El régimen de las ayatolás, no sé qué, el velo tal, y había vuelto entendiendo cómo la islamofobia podía utilizar, ¿no? El tema de la lucha contra la obligatoriedad. Es alucinante, ¿no? Y se había hecho un cartel para estar en la manifestación con esto, ¿no? Entonces yo creo que es importante poner en valor y basarse mucho en las jóvenes, y esto que decía Carmen de esta transmisión generacional, que se corta, que por algún motivo, que supongo que Carmen sabrá explicar bien, la transmisión de la experiencia entre mujeres no fluye. Hay algo que se ha cortado aquí. A lo mejor no hemos podido tener la oportunidad de hablar más con nuestras abuelas, con nuestras madres, ¿no? Todo lo que tiene que ver también con las experiencias de la maternidad, pero con muchas otras cosas. Entonces no sé cómo esto se podría superar por eso las que llegaron antes y han acumulado una experiencia y han hecho este proceso de supervivencia, les sirva para las recién llegadas y sin paternalismos, ¿no? Porque tan mala es la criminalización como el paternalismo. No sé. ¿Qui més?
No, es una buena idea, ¿eh?
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Es muy buena idea porque nuestras abuelas eran igual o peor que muchas mujeres del sur del Mediterráneo, y con la misma mentalidad y con los mismos problemas. Entonces,
espera, que a lo mejor la traducción... Can you, yes?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Vale, sorry, because...
No, it's very good.
no. Yo soy antropóloga, entonces yo he trabajado con personas mayores precisamente en España, y he visto muchas cosas, y ves cuando te dicen en Europa es que vosotros es así. No, perdona, no, nosotros no hemos nacido con la democracia, nosotros hemos estado igual con el patriarcado, nosotros hemos tenido dictadura y lo has tenido que ganar. Y no hay culturas que porque esta cultura es así y la otra cultura es de la otra manera, no pueden ser democráticas. Entonces, si nosotros hablásemos más con las generaciones pasadas, comprenderíamos. Yo, por lo menos, he visto cosas en Marruecos iguales que las que eran en Mallorca, exactamente las mismas.
Can I say something?
Yeah,
very
sure,
quickly.
please.
Thank you for the historical argument, the intergenerational argument. It is exactly why I do think that there was an Arab Spring, and it was a huge success because it transformed society. States have monopoly in the region, and we look at change as state to change. Yes, we need these criminal regimes to go away, but there are other social structures. In October 2019 in Lebanon, we started a chant that was very intersectional. It was about freedom for women from Sudan to Palestine. And then you know what happened to Lebanon, and we left.
Sing it a little bit for
But
us,
2
please.
weeks ago.
Sing it.
No, I can't.
Bah, come on.
No, it's too much. But I will send you on YouTube. Really, it's too much. But 2 weeks ago, someone showed me the chant in Persian. She said, "This we took from you."
Yeah.
Oof, October 2022. What I'm trying to say is that ideas spread, and when women have tasted freedom, have fought for freedom, from our abuelas until now, it's very hard to put them in the box. And I think that we need to have a nuanced narrative. Just because presidents stay over dead bodies doesn't mean that revolutions fail. They can stay. We do something else.
They are better to go.
I hope they can go, but if they don't, we're not going to wait for them.
Què més? Més comentaris? No? No? So, any final idea you would like to close?
No, I'm just super thankful. Thank you very much.
No, we are thankful for
you.
hearing your voices. And what I feel this dialogue is really important. I mean, there is a lot to learn from this side. We need more women voices among experts, also in the academy. You who are able to speak in the media, to have this audience, are also responsible for those who don't have this voice or their voices are not listened. So the heroes that make it, it's important to be listened, and I think that we all need to learn to listen more to the people on the other shore, because it not only gives us, a more accurate view to understand what's going on. By the way, I remember an IMET meeting in 2010, October 2010, correct me if I'm wrong, where you gathered all the experts on the Mediterranean together here in Barcelona. I don't know, it was in Pedralbes or I don't know where. And then maybe it was UPM. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't remember. But it was a big gathering of experts, no? In October 2010 in Barcelona, and conclusion, last line in the common report was, the Arab world is stable, nothing will change. And 2 weeks after, everything started, so.
Many experts said.
Yeah, journalists also are wrong many times. I mean, I was totally sure that there was not going to be a war in Ukraine, that Putin never made it, and that happened. So stop making guesses and listen more to those voices and to women voices. And this is another issue for me as a journalist. It's important because normally women experts are very careful in what they say, and if they don't have anything important and interesting to say as you, they prefer to be quiet, which it's not the same in the case of males. So sometimes you try to get some answer, and nobody's answer except men who don't mind to say black and 1 month later say white, and they never accept they were wrong. So it's more complicated to have women voices sometimes in our reports, but it's much more interesting, and not only to speak about women, but on other issues too. So today it's the closure of the seminar. We will have a couple of final remarks. Ai, perdoneu que em passo a l'anglès. Dic ara a la cluenda d'aquest cicle de conferències. Tenim primer l'Antoine Apriual, que és el cap del Departament de Desenvolupament Sostenible i Integració Regional de l'IAMET, i després ens parlarà el Jaume Lanaspa, president del Club de Roma. Moltíssimes gràcies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'll see you around. Yeah.